All right, guys. So, welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad podcast, episode 324. My name is Eric Moeller, and I am the sit-in podcast host for Jasper Rivers. Jasper is actually flying right now back to Amsterdam and then hopefully into Barcelona, which is kind of crazy. So, he asked me to jump on, and we have an awesome guest today. Not only a good friend of mine, but somebody I look up to in this industry. Not only in the property management side, but his overall vision and thought and what he is this industry. So let's welcome Anton Zilberberg of Auto Host. What's up, Anton? How you doing, man?
So good, man. Living it day by day, figuring it out.
That's right. That's right. Why don't you give everybody just kind of kick this off right from the beginning? Why don't you tell everybody who you are, where you're from, and the things that you're working on? Because not only are you a host and scale, you have a company where we're running north of 100 units, but you also have a very powerful tech company with Auto Host. So why don't you give everyone just a quick little intro on yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. That's actually how we met when we were starting Auto Host, right? You and I.
That's right.
I actually come from digital marketing background, and I used to work as consultant working with startups, and we did growth hacking. We lived in kitesurfing beaches and towns and rented our apartment on Airbnb. And I really thought that I was going to build the next internet-connected Marriott through renting out a bunch of apartments. And we scaled that Airbnb business to about 200 properties that we managed overall in the past couple of years until we got attacked. And we had a series of unfortunate incidents, stolen credit cards, drugs, weapons, and a bunch of different things like that we realized that we can continue operating a short-term rental business out of a residential area, and we had to solve it somehow. So we built a screening system and a tool for our property management company to basically flag what is wrong with each reservation. That turned to become a sophisticated security product. That turned into an identity validation system and a dynamic risk scoring system that enables hosts flag bad guests or what you deem to be bad guests on your terms and get the good guests in through the doors, and obviously minimizing risk, financial risk, and things like that. And that we proved to be at the right place at the right time. We are working with the largest funded property management companies in the world. We're exploring partnerships with hotels and different PMS providers, as well as long-term leasing agencies and multifamilies. And our approach to it is to build a way for good guests to get in friction-free, and for bad guests to create additional friction in the process. And that's just a game changer. It hasn't been done before. Obviously, it comes with its own set of challenges. As a kind of industry creator, as a category creator for ourselves, we need to make it up. We need to figure out how to build it, how to work with it, how to market it, how to sell it. Obviously, tech challenges as well, and some friction there. And that's kind of where we're at. And obviously, we have all been impacted by the corona situation, right? Mm-hmm. And AutoHost is no different. And we're here to support our clients. I'm working with all of our clients, with all of our partners and vendors, and trying to share my knowledge and experience. And hopefully everybody will be able to get through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being here and sharing this. And why we wanted you on here is you have a different perspective, a unique perspective on the industry, because you have the property management side, the hosting side, and you understand the challenges that come along with that. And you still run that business, and curious to see what's happening over there. But then you also have the tech side where you are working with the biggest companies in our industry. So, part of why we wanted you on here is to really understand what is happening to the hospitality industry right now, right? So what, in your opinion, what's going on with the coronavirus and how this is shaping hospitality and the industry that we're in?
Oh man, I've been traveling for the past 10 years, and I've been going on vacations and business trips and things like that every month, every 2 months or whatever. And that's just been a part of my lifestyle, right? It impacted me personally so much that I feel helpless that I can't just hop on a plane and go anywhere. Right? It's just absolutely crazy. And I've never read or seen anything like this before, where you have an entire industry that just basically got like wiped, right? In the span of a couple of weeks. We've seen at AutoHost, we've seen 95% revenue loss as well as transaction loss, right? We bill per transaction. So we've seen that it heavily impacted our business. It impacted every single business in hospitality, all the OTAs, Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia, whatever. Every single vendor that charges that way got impacted by this. And that has the potential to really disrupt industries. And I think it actually presents a lot of opportunities down the line for property managers who are opening their eyes now and kind of reflecting on it, right? And what I've seen on our business, on our property management business, is that it's been very, very difficult to kind of cope with it. We're very localized, so we're dependent on local traffic. We're operating in a metropolitan area in the city of Toronto, and we've basically seen 550 cancellations in about a week and a half or so. Mm-hmm. That is insane, man. Mm-hmm. That is insane. It's so much revenue loss and it's so much tax revenue loss, and it's been very difficult for us to cope with it and to learn how to deal with it. And for the first week or so, I was so anxious. I didn't know what to do, right? Every day the situation was evolving so quickly, and I actually realized fairly quickly that there's nothing I can do, right? I can mitigate the risks as quickly as I can and cut expenses, cut costs, and see how we can shelter ourselves from it. But I'm not immune to this situation. And once I actually adapted that type of mentality where this is beyond my control, things became better.
Right. You emotionally, yeah. This is something that we were preaching last week, is just like getting in the mindset of not focusing on the things that you can't control. Like our minds during crisis love to attach to the things that are fully out of our control. And that seems to be where all of our focus goes. But being able to mentally and emotionally shift to saying, okay, well, this thing is happening. I can't control that. I can't control the outcome, but I can control the way I feel about it, the way I wake up in the morning and take action, and what I'm working towards. So it seems like that's where you and your partners and your team have kind of shifted as well, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And it's, for me personally, it's been a huge learning opportunity as an entrepreneur. And I quickly realized what was important and what wasn't important. So I obviously, like everyone else, I quickly pulled our balance sheet and cash flow and cash projections and P&Ls. And I was like, I looked at everything and I'm like, is this making money? No, buy. Right? Like, right. This doesn't make sense. And I actually started reflecting that the good times were so good, that we were able to operate as like a fat company with a lot of expenditures. And we could have, if we would have reinvested that or looked at it differently or opened up a different market or opened up a different vertical or whatever we would have done with that capital, it would have been better off than just wasting it on whatever we did, right? And that is something that I learned, and that's not something that I'm going to repeat again in any one of my ventures. And I will definitely prioritize healthy balance sheets and good cash flow and good cash flow projections, as well as having an ability to borrow against some form of an asset. And what's interesting is that every time I approached banks, the banks seem to really love our cash flow, right? It's like, oh, you're generating so much cash flow. Here's cash. Here's a loan. And the problem that I realized is that borrowing and leveraging against that cash flow is that you can't borrow against that cash flow if it stops, right? So you have a borrowing issue. And that is something that I didn't put so much emphasis on it because I never thought that 95% of my revenue would be wiped out, right? That's right. It's not something that you can plan for. And if you are planning for it, then you're probably not growing your company fast enough.
Yeah, it's interesting because I say it over and over, up until about a month ago, we were in abundant times where we can just focus on cash flow because it was just coming in, especially in the operators that were focusing on master leases and scaling that model. But yeah, you're right. As soon as that cash flow stops, if you weren't focusing on actual putting cash away, focusing on profit versus focusing on your revenue, and you're in the master lease model where you don't really have any assets at the end of the day, what happens? Like, what happens to your business? I'm really curious to see your opinion on this, of as the industry as a whole, master leasing or rental arbitrage, and then the management model. grew really, really fast the last few years. But, in that exact model where we're only focusing on cash flow, not profit, and we don't have any assets, what's your opinion, man? Like what's going to happen to that model as a whole?
Yeah, man, that's a very good question. I think for me, my awakening was seeing WeWork kind of crumble, and seeing this entire valuation arbitrage from investors. That is when I realized that I need to look closely at all of our books and all of our expenses and really make sure that we have some form of an IP of what we're doing. And our IP is our operations, is our brand, is our employees, our expenditure, our relationships with clients, our contracts and things like that, right? It's not necessarily the cash flow that we're able to generate, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a kind of a byproduct. We're going to be building a company anyways that has some value. It's not because of the cash potential. It has a lot more. Now, the business model that we're in is that we also had a lack of focus at our property management company. And this is something that I have also learned through looking and examining our P&L with our head of finance, is that we actually have 11 revenue streams. 11 revenue streams is a lot of money. We're making money from arbitrage, from master leasing. We make money from management. We make money from security packages. We make money from cable and reselling, things like that. And from cleanings and upmarketing that and supply restocking. Some are more profitable than others. Some are great, and some are just a waste of our resources, right? So a lack of focus really put us in that position instead of focusing on what was important, which is finding the most profitable niche within that segment and just focusing on that full stream. Now, the business models that are impacted the most and that have the most liability are probably the master lease models, right? Because they're so capital intensive and it takes so much money to open up a single unit. You need to acquire the unit, so there's a sales process. You need to pay some commissions to do that, right, to your salespeople. Then you need to furnish the unit. Then you need to, by the time that you're actually furnishing the unit, you need to pay for rent unless you get a break on the rent. And then until you get that money back, we actually calculated that with current conditions, with current ADRs, with everything else, it increased from 6 months, the payback period increased from 6 months per unit to about 2.5 years per unit, right? That is huge.
Yeah.
So that opens up a big financial risk for companies if you're going to fundraise or you're going to borrow or whatever you're going to do and focusing on the master lease, right? The payback period is going to be much, much longer. And I think that model will probably, it's not going to disappear, it's going to change, right? It's going to be more of a combination. I think it's going to be a combination of a rev share together with some form of a commitment, depending on the inventory holder and how desperate they are to fill in the space.
Interesting. So you don't think the master lease model as a whole is going to disappear? It's more of the structuring of how much they're actually on the line for, what they have to bring to the table.
Correct.
Security plus revenue.
Correct. And I mean, look, if you look at all the contracts that the big companies are signing, the Saunders of the world, right? They're making commitments for the next 10, 15 years under commercial agreements. They're not making short-term commitments. It's not a 1 year, 5 year thing. It's a long-term deal. And their arbitrage that they're going after is, well, I can lock in a 15-year lease at a significant reduction, at a significant cost reduction, and then I will make that money back over the course of 10 to 15 years, which is how hotels have been operating as well, right?
Sure.
They've been having that. So, I mean, it's not going to disappear. It's just going to change. It's going to be more professionalized. It's going to be more calculated. I think risk modeling is going to become, specifically for that model, is going to become more relevant now. People are going to pay a lot more attention to it. And at the end of the day, when you're coming to an inventory holder, an inventory supplier who has 100 units, and you're coming to them and you're saying, listen, I will rent those 100 units from you because I can increase your returns at the end of the year, they'll be like, well, what's going to happen in the next downturn, right? I'm going to have to give you a discount. So that could potentially be wiped out. And I heard that sentence from one of the investors who invested in one of those lease arbitrage companies, the big ones, right? And their kind of value proposition that they offered is slowly diminishing.
So what's your opinion on the management model? Where do you think the management model is going right now, especially for urban markets? And where do you think the future of all this is leading?
Yeah, I actually think right now it's the biggest opportunity that short-term rental operators have ever had. And the reason for that is hospitality as a sector has been booming in the past 10 years, right? In the past 10, 15 years, whatever. Flights are cheaper, hotels are more abundant, short-term rentals are more available, Airbnb reduced the cost of travel, there's a lot more options for travel, and the world is more connected, so you can live and work in different places, work from home and all of that, right? And that created a bunch of opportunities and opportunity abundance in the travel sector overall. What ends up happening now is you're going to have a bunch of these buildings that are hotel buildings, right? That have fired all of their staff. Like the Marriott fired, I don't know, 30,000 people. I don't know, whatever they fired, right?
Yeah,
it's insane. It's an insane amount of people. For them just to rehire 30,000 people back, it's going to take them years to do that, right? They're not going to hire them all back right away. So that means that they're going to look for efficiencies in their operations. They're going to look for new technology. They're going to look for a new process. And that process is actually going to come from the short-term rental space. If you look at the Sonders, at the Domios, and these guys, what they bring to hospitality is operational efficiency above all, right? Sonder has been able to furnish 200 units in a week or something. They managed to figure out the supply chain. They managed to figure all of those out to fill the units as quickly as possible with guests, right? That is their biggest innovation. And these guys and that type of process and that type of SOP and that type of technology is going to be play a bigger role in the new age of hospitality when this entire thing recovers. And that's why the rev share model, the management model for an operator could actually become very, very beneficial. Me right now, as an operator, what I would do is I would go and I would find a hotel, like a distressed hotel owner, and I would tell them, look, the model that you've operated until now wasn't efficient. Maybe you were paying a bunch of franchise fees to whatever big company. And once we get out of it, maybe there's a better way to operate your hotel, right? Maybe you need less staff. Maybe you need better rooms. Maybe you need to have a concept. And that's how I would approach it, and just do a rev share agreement with the inventory holder. And instantly you would get access to a building. And look, I've spoken to a bunch of hotel owners. Almost none of them have just one hotel. They have multiple hotels. They leverage and buy more and more and kind of roll it into like a conglomerate of hotels.
Now that sounds, I couldn't agree with you more. I've been saying that for the last few weeks, that I feel what this crisis will birth is a new opportunity in boutique hotels, unique hotels in locations that you can actually be approved and have the licensing to run the actual short-term rental business there. Plus you have the asset, right? That sounds like a massive, massive feat for a lot of people to undertake, right? Do you see that being only the large companies that are able to do that? Or do you see more operators that are at your size of 50 to 200 units being able to start tapping into that type of model?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been talking to a bunch of industry players. I've been talking to other software vendors, and I was trying to understand who is going to come out of it alive. Like, what type of what type of players are going to come out of it? Is it vacation rentals, urban markets? Is it master leases? Is it funded companies, unfunded companies? And I came to a conclusion that whoever has the least amount of overhead and the least amount of expenses is the person who's going to come out of it, right? So if you've been operating 50 units, 100 units, or 200 units, it means that it's not a lifestyle business anymore. It's your full-time job. You have some process, right? You can apply that process to a different building or a different inventory, to a different piece of inventory that will make it a lot more profitable down the line. So I think the opportunity lies for those who have been kind of patient, right? And haven't been riding that big wave of growth. And that's just by sheer luck, right? I mean, I obviously praise all the entrepreneurs who managed to squeeze and raise a bunch of money in the space right before this happened and grew super quickly. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. The growth is going to be a lot more sustainable going forward. You're not going to be seeing this like multiplier of 5x, 10x per year in unit count and revenue from these companies. I don't think that's going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years, right? So to answer your question, the opportunity lies basically for anyone who's innovative, and anyone who can take the time to research and study and figure out where that opportunity will lie. And it could just be across the street, right? It could very well be in the retail space that just not kicked out, but the gym that closed down because they couldn't do anything with it. And you're going to convert it into like a work and live type of an environment. That's an opportunity. You're going to have an abundance of commercial real estate, right? All the WeWorks that are going to close down, and all of those office spaces that are going to close down because there's more people going to be working from home, right? That's just how it's going to be, and at least for the foreseeable future. So there's going to be a bunch of opportunities everywhere, and converting that opportunity into hospitality places is going to be pretty big in the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah, I love that, man. I agree. And it's almost like it created a whole new niche within short-term rentals. Like this whole COVID crisis has created a new niche of short-term rentals meets the co-work place, right? You're seeing Sonder really stepping into that. I know a lot of hosts inside our communities are converting their properties to co-work or homework locations. Do you see that becoming a whole new business model, or is it going to be a mix of the two?
Totally. I think I've always said that I think the biggest opportunity in the short-term rental space is the combination between short-term and long-term housing, because what we supply as short-term rental providers is the ability to roll in with a suitcase and a computer and live there for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year, for whatever you want, right? So the work from home concept is going to be even more important now, and a concept that you need to, let's say, live in San Francisco and pay expensive San Francisco prices in order to get that expensive, that good San Francisco salary, it will diminish throughout. I mean, you'll be able to live in Mexico, right, and still make San Francisco salary if you really wanted to, without paying the San Francisco rent. And that model will probably prevail. So the work from home, the work from anywhere, internet connected working, and all of this is going to, I think it's going to become even bigger than co-working spaces potentially, right? I mean, if you market your apartments right now and it has a convenient office and screens and fast internet and everything else, listen, it's going to get booked.
Right. Yeah, I read something the other day that it was a couple of weeks ago that 1/3 of the U.S. working population is able to work remotely. 1/3.
It's huge.
So to me, it's massive, right? It's massive to see that amount of numbers. And then now companies shifted so fast in every sector, have shifted so fast to figure out how to keep themselves in business and run their companies remotely. So I think that 1/3 is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. I agree. I see the overhead expense of having massive offices and all these other things that come along with running a company is just going to dwindle down. So being able to structure yourself to capitalize that and the short term and midterm, if you will, stays. And that's something I wanted to ask you as well. We see this a lot with a lot of hosts are switching from short-term stays, right? So from the average of 1 to 3 days to now 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Do you see that becoming a new focus for a lot of these operators?
I think everyone realizes that it's inevitable, and regulation would make it inevitable from a zoning perspective, right? Because you have restrictions 180 days or 90 days or whatever it would be, right? So that's just the way that things would roll out. And so, yeah, that's a must, right? That also comes with its own sets of risk, right? I definitely see an opportunity for some form of a player like Airbnb to come in and provide a different type of a concept where you would say, hey, I'm going to have a lease, a 12-month lease with this company, and I will be able to plug into locations all over the world, and I can move around every week or every month or whatever it could be. And it's just a kind of a flexible environment. I think 2-3 years ago, I pitched somebody in Brazil when we were kite surfing and on the beach is that I think that there's a space for subscription living where you would just buy like a bachelor, a subscription to a bachelor package or whatever. and you would have
Right.
access to a bunch of 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms all over the world, and you'll be able to plug them in and move around really quickly, swiftly between those. But it's all going to be one network, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a bunch of cool opportunities within that space, and it's just going to prevail. I think it's going to be more important. And actually, to what you said before, my mom has a yoga studio, and she had to close down her yoga studio. So she was like, "Well, I want to do Zoom classes now, and I want to do an online classes." So we were talking about her online classes, and she's like, "Do you think people will pay for it?" I'm like, "Maybe.
Right.
Let's do a Zoom class with your clients and see if they like it." They absolutely freaking loved it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gave them a sense of community, and she was able to give them more attention. So she just added more value add inside, and now she's going to drop her entire studio completely just in favor of online classes. My mom, right?
That's incredible.
That
That's
is
incredible.
a different business from what she's had. And we were actually running an experiment now, is that she's doing yoga classes every weekday from 9 to 10 a.m. And she's hopping from every one of our apartments, and she's doing a class in every apartment.
Oh, that's
So
hilarious.
she's like changing scenery too.
I love it. I love it, man. Yeah, I actually our yoga studio just did the same thing down here where they can't run back, can't keep anybody in their studio, so they have to do it online. And that that opened up my mind before this whole COVID crisis. I never really took anything online when it came to physical, exercise or anything. But now it's like, well, this is our only option, and we're actually enjoying it more than having to travel and go to the studio and everything else. So, and we can bring in so many more friends that are around the country into those classes. So, I agree. I think that's going to be big for a lot of different companies. I'm just really curious how how is this going to really shape the travel industry? What are your thoughts on the travel industry coming back? Do you see people being comfortable traveling very soon? Is it local? Is it global? What's your take on this, on how COVID is impacting the psychology of travel right now?
So I ask everyone I randomly, right, that I speak to, is like, when are you going to feel comfortable hopping on a plane again? And
Hmm.
I think a common answer is, for people right now who haven't lost their jobs and still have some form of income coming in and had vacations planned, they haven't canceled those vacations. So they're not that scared from the actual travel portion of things. Um, so that is actually interesting, right? So the perception is when it will feel safe again, and we need
Yeah.
to have some form of a piece of trust that will enable that, right? It's either a vaccine or a a vaccine or some form of knowledge on how to cope with this disease a little bit better. So that is one thing. On how quickly and which types of travel will come back, at first it's going to be the immediate business travel, right? That will have to come back. That will have to come back. It's like engineers and things like that. I need to fly to an inspection at a mine somewhere in Bolivia or something like this. That's just a must, right? That is the first thing that's going to come back. So inspections, compliance, something that is resource oriented: water, electricity, power, gas. The next thing that will, after that, in the leisure side, it will be local travel, so drive-in markets. And I think Guesty released a report that there are certain markets that are vacation rental markets, traditional vacation rental markets, that are actually booming now and performing a little bit better than they had before. Napa
Right.
Valley is an example. Upstate New York is another example, because there's an exodus from the cities going to those vacation rental towns. So that is an example of how that travel ecosystem will change. And then how long will it actually take to come back to normal? I don't think that we're going to come back and see what we've had a month ago. I think it's going to be a gradual change. There is an opportunity there, right? There's an opportunity to change transport. Maybe you were going to have more efficient flights, right? Maybe we're going to have more efficient airports. Maybe we're going to have more efficient methods of transportations. Maybe we're going to have different types of business models. And coming out of that, I mean, there's, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. It's we're noticing that a lot, especially here in the States, is secondary markets, traditional vacation rental markets are actually doing quite well, especially outside of the major cities. They're doing quite well right now, and it made me think for our business to start making our switch to focusing on those secondary markets because we were talking to Simon Lehman the other day, and he had mentioned he's like Eric, think about it. These vacation rental markets have been there forever. They've been through every single crisis this world has seen, and they're still there, and they're there for a reason. So choosing a different market, I do see those secondary markets coming back faster than the urban markets. Doesn't mean that there won't be any opportunity in the urban markets. I just see for me when I'm making a decision as an operator, where do I expand my business? To me, I'm like, okay, the travel will come back in leisure markets faster than they will in urban markets, in my opinion. Two is that the regulations and the competition and everything that are in those cities now will just get harder and harder for operators to really kind of stand out and make a real profit, not just revenue, right? So how long it'll take, it's kind of no one will ever know. But to me, it's, I see the industry completely changing, but those secondary markets still holding really, really strong.
Yeah, 100%. I think in urban markets, the trend is going to be that more hotels are going to look more like short-term rentals, right? Like I said before, that is something that's just going to happen. Hotels are going to be a little bit more efficient and offer something else for their $200 ADR. Like I stayed in a hotel in New York a couple of weeks ago, months ago, whatever. And it was a nice room, right? But they had absolutely nothing for the $250 a night that I paid for it, right? They had no value prop. They had very little. And on the other hand, I can rent somebody's apartment for, let's say, the same amount of money, but I can actually live there. I can actually be there. So I think that's going to change really quickly. And the value will become a little bit clearer too, right? And maybe there's going to be a less red tape. Maybe there's going to be more red tape. Who knows, right?
Mm-hmm. We'll yeah. So I want to make a transition into something that you specialize in. I'm really curious to see what is happening in the industry right now. And tomorrow you're actually going to be doing a deep training on this for Inner Circle members on how to minimize risk on properties, right? And one thing that we're noticing is a lot of hosts right now are switching from not just relying on Airbnb and all these other platforms to drive bookings, is now switching to direct bookings and taking on not only short term, but medium term guests. So I'm really curious to hear on the auto host side, what are you guys seeing right now as like one of the biggest risks that hosts are running into? And then what do you suggest for hosts to kind of minimize that risk?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. And we're in risk mitigation. And our kind of company mentality is to make sure that we build and educate the industry on how to stay safe. The most important thing is know your guest and who's coming inside, right? Be confident that you have done enough research to confirm that Eric is Eric, right? And that Eric is actually coming in to with the intentions that he's stating that he's coming in. Then you want to make sure that Eric actually has money.
Well, before you move on, I'm curious, what are those steps? Like, how do you actually go and actually confirm if Eric is Eric?
Sure. So you have a bunch of indicators, right? You have phone indicators, you have voice indicators. You can give Eric a phone call and say, hey, am I actually speaking to Eric? Because until now you've had an online conversation. You don't really know who's behind who's behind the screens, that type of a thing. Having a conversation is the easiest way to verify people's identity because you can pick on if they're answering the phone, if they picked up the phone, if they're not picked up the phone, if they're confident in their answers or not, right? So having a super quick 5-minute conversation with somebody is very simple. We actually always recommend to mask it as a customer service call and saying, hi, I'm Anton, I'm calling. Hi, Eric, I'm Anton calling to confirm your reservation. I just want to make sure that you're coming in. Do you have any special requests? Yes, no. What's the purpose of your stay? Where do you work? Why do you need space right now? What happened to your existing solution, your existing housing option, and things like that? So that is very important to actually verify that. The next thing that you want to do is after you've established a way of verification is that you want to hold some pieces of information about the guest, right? And holding and verifying that piece of information could be their ID, could be their credit card, could be a match of things, could be a rental usage agreement or a contract or whatever you're actually comfortable doing. That is super important, because if I verified your identity, now I want to make sure that I am holding you accountable for your actions inside the space. The only way to do this is by holding some piece of information against you. It could be a security deposit, right? That I'm not going to refund it to you if you create an issue in my space. That is slightly more complicated. And so that's the second thing. The last thing is you want to make sure that you're actually able to pay. And at AutoHost, we've seen the risk across our entire company go up by about 30 points on average. That is humongous. What ended up happening is that more reservations got squeezed into a shorter lead time, which are automatically by nature higher risk, and they are higher ADRs, higher amounts, right? And in properties, in sometimes in expensive properties, in 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartments. And that has the potential of somebody defaulting on the payment or staying there for longer, right? Which is a really big headache. You really don't want to find yourself in that situation right now. It's not a good use of your resources. It's better to do an additional check, meet the person and meet the guest in person, verify them, have some references, do whatever you need to do. I actually suggested to somebody to even request direct bank transfer for the funds if it's like a $9,000 for 2 months, right? $9,000 for 2 months, because maybe right now they have a job, maybe next month they're not going to have a job. They'll be like, oh, I just paid $9,000 on my credit card for this. I'm going to do a chargeback here, right? You're going to lose that money. Now you've lost the money. You've supplied the service. You need to pay the rent, or you need to explain that to your owner, who's also desperate for money, right? And you need to kick the person out. Like, it's so much headache.
Yeah. So it seems like, I mean, I think we all have to make that decision, and that understanding that we are going from this abundant time of bookings just coming in through, and most people just through Airbnb, and you don't have to really confirm this, right? Because we're trusting on the OTAs that they're confirming the identity of the guest, right? And I know you have a different opinion of that, but the psychology of the host going through this, we used to just list our properties, have them book, and send a couple of messages out, all of that other stuff. Now we have to get hands-on with our guests. We have to call them. We have to communicate with them. You're suggesting checking them in, or making sure that they're actually checking in, especially on the bigger bookings.
Everything that will make you feel confident that this is the guest that you want to have inside your property, right? Particularly with the wonky regulatory laws right now that you can't have evictions and things like that. If they claim tenancy, you can find yourself in a very awkward situation. And you really don't want to put yourself in that situation now, right? It's, in my perspective, it's better to potentially lose out on that revenue than to take that risk. Right now, it's a very, very, very high risk season and a high risk period, right? Because people have lost jobs, people are desperate, you have no idea what's going to happen. And you know what? The fraudsters, they don't take a break.
Yeah.
Right? They see and they prey on our on how we want to help and our vulnerability to want to help, and that's just human nature. And they'll exploit that to the max, right? And what we've seen at AutoHost is actually, it's phenomenal that people are still sending in one-night requests for potential party places. Like, they're very high risk. And I've seen on one of our properties is that somebody actually tried to organize a birthday party for her 12 friends. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? There's a lockdown and a quarantine, not a quarantine, but there's a lockdown. You're not allowed, and there's a law in Ontario where we live that you're not allowed to have a gathering of more than 5 people. So what are you doing? This is not what it was intended for. So we block the ability, we remove the ability to book 1 night stays or 2 night stays. We're doing a minimum of 7 or 14 days to lock that in, to lock in that revenue for a little bit of a longer period.
Got it. Yeah, Anton, I appreciate you being here, man. We can go into so many different rabbit holes. Every time you and I get together, we just we go deep on these conversations. For everyone who's listening, is there any advice or suggestions that you could pass out to everybody right now?
Yeah, I'm actually going to repeat what Rebecca told me from from SDR Legends, and we've had a call a couple of weeks ago, and everybody was like stressed trying to figure things out. And she expressed that the most important part is your mental state and your mental well-being. And you know what? Since she said that, I reflected back and I realized that I was so anxious and I was so desperate to try to figure out if I can solve this situation somehow. And I realized that it's just beyond my control right now. There's not a lot that I can do. And the most important part is just to be healthy, mentally healthy, make good rational decisions, not rush into anything. I've listened to a bunch of podcasts from investors, and one of the VCs said, well, you're not going to be a hero investing now, right? You're just not. There's no clear answers. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So don't rush into any decisions. Don't make anything that will jeopardize your way of recovering out of it. And don't stress over it. Just chill the fuck out.
I love it, man. I love it. Yeah, I appreciate you being here. I'm excited to dive into the inner circle training tomorrow. Super excited for that. I know you're going to go into detail. So thank you for showing up tomorrow for that. And for everybody else, thank you for showing up for the podcast. You can reach out to Anton through autohost.ai. Is that
.ai, yeah.
.ai, yeah, autohost.ai. And Anton, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Ciao.